Hello, everyone. My name is Bernhard Clemm from the European University Institute, and I'm presenting a paper titled Believing and Sharing Information by Fake Sources, which is joint work with Paul Bauer from the University of Mannheim. This is a paper currently under review. Let me start by just pointing out some motivations that led to this research. First of all, we see that trust in news media in Western democracies has been waning for decades. Here's just some data from the United States, which shows that self-expressed trust has dropped massively. Second motivation is debate around fake news, a component of which is the fact that fake news are, of course, often proliferated by fake sources. So news sites or social media accounts that do not actually represent any real news organization. Like, for example, the Denver Guardian, who just before the 2016 US presidential elections proliferated this fake news about Hillary Clinton, which was shared massively on Facebook. And the question is why people fall for these fake sources. Third motivation is that we see that trust in news media is increasingly influenced by partisanship or correlates with partisanship. Here we see some data from the US, which shows that Republicans trust or express higher trust in sources that we would typically consider more right-wing, and vice versa for Democrats. So all of these observations led us to the question how sources drive whether people believe and share information. Imagine the situation that some social media user sees a Facebook post like this, which essentially contains a news report. And by report, we mean throughout this research, we mean news that are factual in the sense that they describe some objective reality, whether it's true or not. So we're not talking about opinion pieces or analysis or the like. So just imagine a Facebook user encounters this report, and the question is why or what would make him or her believe that this is accurate, and what would make him or her share this report. So these are the two main outcomes of this research. And I'm here giving you, already giving you how we measure them. Before we get more into the methods, some theoretical considerations and specifications, what we are actually interested in here. So most generally, if people are sort of rational information processors, or even if they just have accuracy goals, some of the time who says something should play a role. And of course, there's a long-standing literature on source credibility that argues exactly this. High credibility sources will be more persuasive and believable than low credibility sources. There are many different operationalizations of credibility. What we're interested in here is how a source that represents a real news organization that has a good reputation compares with a fake source, by which we mean some social media account or generally some actor on the internet basically just posing as a real reputable source without actually being a news organization. So this is what we mean by this contrast between fake and real. And the first expectation is, of course, that people have a higher tendency to believe news reports attributed to real source and a fake source, and the analogous effect for sharing intentions. Okay, more interestingly, of course, we theorize that credibility perception must somehow be influenced by previous interactions. Coming from a theory of trust, which basically states that whether you trust someone depends on how you previously interacted whether the person that you're supposed to trust did what they actually promised. In a similar manner, we kind of expect that credibility perceptions of a source should depend on whether you have previously encountered this source as truth-telling. But the twist to that is that, of course, it is more important whether you believe that the source told the truth than whether it actually did tell the truth. And of course, this belief of yours will be ideologically motivated, as we know from studies researching motivated reasoning, confirmation bias, assimilation bias, and so on and so forth. So in other words, our prediction is that people who previously saw congruent news from a source will have a higher tendency to believe this source in subsequent encounters. And similar prediction goes for sharing intention. However, as a qualification to this, we think that this congruence effect should matter much more for fake sources than real sources, because people have already had a chance to interact with real sources before, so their credibility perceptions about that source should be more or less crystallized, and therefore credibility shouldn't be malleable so much, which in turn will affect their believing and sharing. So much for theoretical expectations. Now, to test these, we ran an online survey experiment last year, which was pre-registered. We used a German quota sample. We did this with the context of immigration, and this was approved ethically by the European University Institute. To understand what was going on in the experiment, consider this diagram. We started by asking subjects a couple of background questions like sociodemographics, general media trust, political knowledge, and so on and so forth. Then people entered the experimental stage. They were randomized into 4 treatments. And then they read 5 news reports in a row. And the first news report was only manipulated in terms of the source, and the news reports were either attributed to the real source, which we operationalized as Tagesschau, which is one of the most well-known and trusted news brands in Germany, or they read these reports by the fake source, which we made up with the name Nachrichten 360, which loosely translates as News 360. Then reports 2, 3, and 4, they were, in addition to being manipulated in terms of the source, they were also manipulated in terms of the content. So these were 3 news reports that presented some kind of facts which would either support an anti-immigration or a pro-immigration position. In the final stage, report 5, again, was only manipulated in terms of the source. So this is very important. Report 5 had exactly the same content across treatments. It only differed in terms of whether it was presented by the real source or the fake source. And after that, we asked some more background questions, debriefed subjects, and that was it. Just to illustrate a bit more, in more detail, the 2 manipulations. So the first treatment dimension was whether all reports 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 were attributed to the real or the fake source. Here you see the difference. It was mainly in the name and logo. And the second treatment dimensions, as I said, referred to the content of reports 2, 3, and 4. Here's an example. Report 4 basically was about crime statistics of immigrants versus non-immigrants in Germany, and the manipulations consisted in either claiming that there was no overrepresentation of immigrants, or there was an overrepresentation. And to do these manipulations, we basically departed from a real baseline. And from these two content treatment conditions, we constructed a congruence treatment that depended, of course, on the attitudes on immigration that subjects had expressed earlier. Right, let's get to some results. First of all, did the source have an impact on whether people believed and shared report 1? And in terms of belief, yes, there was an effect on a scale from 0 to 6. People were, belief on average was people believed the report when it was attributed to the real source about 0.6 units more. Effects for sharing are less clear. The only significant effect holds for Facebook. Congruence. Did previous congruence matter for whether people believed and intended to share report 5? Yes, there is such an effect as we predicted. However, for sharing, this is only the case for Facebook. Even more interestingly, though, we are interested whether this congruence effect would differ between the two types of sources. And again, we see that this is the case. Here, I'm not showing you the interaction coefficients and their significance, but there is a significant interaction between the congruence treatment and the source treatments for belief and belief of report 5. And we try to illustrate this with this sort of over time diagram. Here you see that essentially for people in the fake source condition, it's whether the belief of report 5 is affected by whether they have previously seen congruent or incongruent content. So the only difference between these two dots here is which congruent treatment you were exposed to during reports 2, 3, and 4. And as you see here, for the blue dots, there is absolutely no difference for the real source. In other words, fake sources can gain credibility just by providing congruent information to people. Additionally, although this was not a preregistered question, we were also interested in whether these effects varied across population segments. We measured all sorts of covariates, which I'm listing here. I'm not going into detail. Then we used some recently developed machine learning methods, that is causal forests, that basically let you partition the data to find the regions where treatment effects vary the most. And for the source effects, so whether people had higher belief. So all of these analyses only pertain to belief because sharing results were much less clear. So here you see to what extent the source effect varied across different subgroups. We find strong effects for mainstream media trust in the sense that people who express high general trust in the mainstream media, they're much more likely to be impressed by the real source compared to the fake source. For people who voted AfD, so the populist right-wing party in Germany, this is much less the case in the sense that they are much less impressed by the real source vis-a-vis the fake source. We did the same for congruence effect and also find some heterogeneity. Just going to pick out 2 here. For example, age. We see that older people are generally fall less for the congruence effect, and voters of the AfD fall more for this effect. So in other words, they will believe a source more that has previously given them congruent content. Just a couple of takeaways. So especially the congruence effect, they might explain why media trust is partisan and how fake or hyperpartisan sources can gain people's trust by providing certain kind of contents. All of this, however, is less clear for sharing intentions. We believe that these mechanisms likely differ. Time is running up. I just want to thank you for listening and looking forward to many interesting and challenging questions. Bye.